Preservation Association of Lincoln Brown Bag Lecture Series. My name's Eileen Burkton. I'm the coordinator of these brown bags. Our lecture today is sponsored by Speedway Properties. Our speaker today is Jim McKee. Jim is a lifelong Lincolnite. His great-grandparents pioneered in Lancaster County in the 1870s. Jim has a bachelor's degree from UNL and operates J&L Lee Company, a publisher of regional books as well as a coinery. Jim has written numerous articles and books on Lincoln and Nebraska history. Jim serves on the City of Lincoln Historic Preservation Commission. He is also a founding member of the Preservation Association of Lincoln. This is the 48th number in the series of talks that's titled Jim McKee's Complete History of Lincoln. Please join me in welcoming Jim McKee.
And everybody that got the postcard and looked at it closely probably at first thought that the picture of the Capitol was upside down because the chandelier is on the floor. But in fact, it's correct. Everything else is upside down. Yeah, so it's an interesting picture, and it'll catch your attention if you didn't see it already. Okay, continuation of what we started out from. I think from cabins to mansions or something. We're slipping away from mansions a little bit and talking about just houses, but Gordon, who wondered how far that could go, as I pointed out, it's almost an infinite supply of houses and the people that occupy them. This appears to be a highly colored version of a photograph of the Seifert House. I didn't realize till we projected it how colorful it was. It looks like my screensaver almost, but the Seifert House on the campus is what we're talking about first today. The man we want to associate first with it, his name was Elijah Moser Lewis, who was a Presbyterian minister who came to Lancaster County in about 1863, so very early before the city of Lincoln was here, and really before the city of Lancaster was here, before to any degree. He was a Presbyterian minister, and the first thing he did was, interestingly enough, to start a congregational church at Denton, Nebraska. How that transpired, I don't know. 1877, however, Mr. Lewis purchased lot number 1 in a brand new subdivision called Little's Subdivision, which was just outside the original plat of the city of Lincoln to the north and a little bit to the east. That subdivision ran from O Street to V Street, 14th Street to 17th Street. His house is on lot number 1 on the northeast corner of what was then Grand Avenue and University Place. We'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second. Totally unclear, but I'm suspicious that the house was started in 1878 and probably completed in 1880. Varying places have it being constructed in 1878, 1879, and 1880, so take your choice. Termed a 1.5-story French Second Empire of clapboard, and it's called a cottage quite frequently rather than a house. Mr. Lewis, in 1885, who lived there, started Nebraska Savings Bank, which probably means very little to you, except he relocated that bank to the southeast corner of 13th and O Streets. That site will later become the site of the Bank of Commerce, then the National Bank of Commerce, and currently Walgreens. In 1891, Mr. Lewis exits the picture by being thrown from a horse and dying. And at that point in time, roughly, Grand Avenue will become the less lyrical 16th Street, and University Place, which we tend to confuse with the city of University Place, was actually the name of the street, University Place, which was the first street before V Street. V Street's going to become Vine Street at the same time. Interesting how it all worked out. U, University Place, V, Vine, but it did work out, and it's about that time. 1904, the house was purchased by DeWitt Seifert, whose name we usually associate with the house. He was with the Pacific Mutual Telegraph Company. His daughter, Constance, becomes the most important player, perhaps. She taught variously at Bryn Mawr, Yale, Kansas State, Illinois Wesleyan, University of Illinois, and Millikan University, and I'm not sure where that was. In 1923, Constance became a professor of English at the University of Nebraska, however. In 1926, her father, DeWitt Seifert, dies, and he leaves the house to Constance and Ethel and Lester. Then, she lives in the house. 1965, the house sells, or I should not say it's sold. It was left by Constance to the Nebraska State Historical Society. My guess has always been that she did that to prevent the university from getting it and tearing it down. I can't be sure. That's a pretty good guess, I think. So she left it not to the university, but to the Nebraska State Historical Society, which is ultimately what saved it, I think. Nonetheless, in the 1970s, the house was used by the University of Nebraska as an office for counseling at the university. Then in 1971, the house was put on the National Register of Historic Places. Kind of watch it carefully, and it will become owned by our friend Joel Sartori in 2013, whose son and daughter, his son Cole and his daughter Ellen, will live in the house while they're going to the University of Nebraska. And as they graduate, he will turn it, sadly, into sort of a residence, which he will rent or lease to other students, which proved a difficult position because they did not take good care of the house. So in 2024, he had to completely redo the house. And they did some pretty good damage to the house, apparently. Only one other picture of any interest, I think. Let's see if I've got this upside down. All right. Just a picture I took in the lower level of the house when Joel had it. Interesting, but not of any consequence. At any rate, he had to redo the house, and in doing that, he decided that renting it out to students was probably not the correct answer. So 2025, he asked the Historic Preservation Commission to revise its use, and it became an office building instead of a residence. Probably, well, without question, it's the oldest building on the university campus, and as I said, it is now literally on the campus. It's also, depending on how you define it, the second oldest house in the city of Lincoln. The oldest house would easily be the Kennard House, next door to the Ferguson House, catty corner from the Capitol building. But you run into some interesting definitional problems because the Hudson Cabin, which is much earlier, but it's no longer in the city limits. It's at Pioneer Park, so in a way it is the oldest. And also the Cadman House, which is on West Calvert, which is technically not in the city limits either. But on the other hand, the house has been so badly changed through the years that it is not eligible, for example, to be in the historic preservation list. So the Seifert House. Another house that is not a mansion by any stretch of the imagination belonged to Dr. Benjamin Bailey, who was born in Littleton, New Hampshire, got his degree in medicine, homeopathic medicine, in 1881, and in 1886, moved to the city of Lincoln and lived in his house and had his practice in his house at 1347 L Street. 1895, he moved to 1044 H Street, and at that point in time, he will convert what had started as a private dormitory operated by businessmen, later a Catholic school, at 1441 University Place, which we now know is also U Street, which would be virtually across the street to the east from Morrill Hall. He took that building and converted it into a hospital known under a couple of names, Tabitha City Hospital, and also sometimes a variant of Tabitha Home and Hospital out on Randolph, 45th and Randolph, 48th and Randolph, in that area, sometimes called Lincoln Lutheran Hospital. But at any rate, the main hospital was out there, and he converted the building downtown to a hospital. Then in 1898, Lincoln Normal University burned to the ground, a stone building which shouldn't have burned, and is a long story in and of itself. It burned to the ground pretty much, and in 1901, Dr. Bailey formed a corporation, and he purchased the old property around Lincoln Normal University, which at that time still contained the men's dormitory, which sat on the southwest corner of 56th and South Streets, pretty much facing towards the north, and that became the nucleus of his new hospital, Dr. Benjamin F. Bailey's Green Gables Sanitarium or Sanatorium. He had 25 acres which he purchased, which was pretty much all, if not all, of the original Lincoln Normal campus, which ran from Normal Boulevard to South Street. It was on the College View trolley line, originally not called the College View travel line. Originally, it only went to Normal, Nebraska. That's the line which ran along Sumner, went by where today we have the All Pavilion, kind of through the golf course and over to South Street, went South Street east to about 52nd Street, and there it had a loop taking you back downtown. That loop was extended ultimately to the south and connected the city of Lincoln through Normal, through the village, to the village, I should say, of College View, which through the years had 3 different trolley lines connecting it. That's an aside, has nothing to do with our story here. In 1906, there were 2 primary buildings. The original men's dormitory has been converted to hospital use, and another one. They have a staff of 35. There are 25 of those as nurses, and a 55-patient hospital. You could get a physical exam from Dr. Bailey for either $5 or $10. It depended on how thorough you wanted to be. I think for $5, he did the old gimmick of sticking his hand in your pocket and seeing if your billfold is warm. And for $10, you got a complete physical, something like that. It also depended on whether you wanted the physical at the hospital or in his offices, which were in the Burr Block, the building on the northeast corner of 12th and O Streets. Also, hospital rooms at that time in the original building were either $20 or $25 per week. Also, if their building was not completely full of patients and you were visiting a patient, you could rent a room like a hospital room for $2 a night. Heck of a deal. He also kept his office, Dr. Bailey did, downtown at 12th and O during this period of time. Then in 1919, the village of Normal, which was a separate city or village, which explains why Normal Boulevard is named Normal, for the Normal School and the village of Normal. It was annexed to the city of Lincoln. And at that time, Dr. Bailey's hospital was advertised as the largest, best equipped institution in the West. Take that for what it means, very little advertising. Hard to say. And by that time, Dr. Bailey had built this cottage for himself at 5345 South Street. So on the south side of South Street, pretty much across from what was at that time the business district, if you will, of the village of Normal. 1942, what had been a school of nursing closed, and later on, the last physician to be occupied there, Dr. Sam Miller, had left the institution and started a private practice across the street on the north side of South Street, leaving Dr. May Flanagan in ownership of the property, and she will sell it to the Benedictine Sisters, and they will convert the old campus into and the buildings into first pretty much was retirement home, and has developed through the years into the Madonna Rehabilitation Hospital. In 2005, the residence was destroyed or became another parking lot. The last resident, as far as I know, was probably Father Redmersky and his hunting dogs, according to the story. 2025, we visit the campus and find that there's literally nothing left of the school on site. The Normal public school had been located on the northwest corner of the property, which would be the southeast corner of 52nd and South. That was gone, and they'd taken out the very last remnants, which were just concrete steps in the side of the hill. But what did survive from the old school was a couple of stones which were at the archway entrance to the building, which some of the Lincoln Normal School graduates asked Dr. Bailey to give to them. They had been in his garden, and they reinstalled those in Roberts Park, so you can still see them. And the last I knew, there was still a pretty good plaque explaining where they came from. How long the plaque or the stones will last is anybody's guess. Now, all that area can be associated, or a lot of it is, with Artemus Roberts. This is his house. In 1870, Artemus Roberts came to, first of all, Council Bluffs. Council Bluffs, he got there by railroad. Then he came across the Missouri River in a rowboat, briefly took a stagecoach from where to where, I can't be sure, but then he walked the rest of the way into the city of Lincoln. And one of the things he did was he built furniture for the first Capitol building, but only briefly, because as he did that, he discovered that he was not going to be paid until the legislature reconvened. And so he was not enamored with that. And he went back to his trade and was able to become an architect full-time, 1871, with his office at number 6 O Street, designed the first high school building in Lincoln, which sat on the block where now we had Pershing Auditorium, and now we have I think 3 or 4 story apartments, low income perhaps. And I don't know whether Ed has ever figured out, I've tried in vain to figure out how the addresses were numbered, and what number 6 O Street means is, as far as I know, kind of up for grabs. But in many cities, and I think maybe in Lincoln, what happened was they started at one end, and as buildings were built, that's how it got its number. I'm looking to Ed to see if I can see a confirmation or a negation. I don't know, but I think that's what happened. I don't know. Number 6, anyway, that's where his office was. He will then purchase a quarter section of land, which starts at 56th and A Streets and goes towards the southeast. And that quarter section, if you go to the northwest corner of that intersection, you will be in Piedmont. If you go to the northeast corner of that intersection, you will be in Eastridge. So you can figure out where you are right there. He paid $2,800 for that quarter section of land and built this 2-story house, not really at an address because it was farmland, but approximately, as near as I can tell, we'll call it 58th and Sumner, but that's just an approximation, faced towards the south. Probably Mrs. Roberts on the front porch, and I think that because the Roberts family prepared a biography of the family, which they gave me a copy of, and it identifies her as such, but it has a question mark after it, so we think it's Mrs. Roberts. He partnered at that time with another architect, Alfred Woods, and they built the A.J. Sawyer House we'll be talking about in a minute at 840 South 17th Street. He then is convinced to give the land to Lincoln Normal University. This is, to me, a little problematic because it doesn't look like that was in his quarter section, but maybe he owned extra land, I can't be sure, but that would have been actually, I think, to the west of his quarter section. At any rate, he's noted as giving the land for Lincoln Normal University. His son, James Russell Roberts, will be a graduate of Lincoln Normal University. 1902, he will be the architect for Fairview, William Jennings Bryan's house. He's got several buildings still left in the county, at least, that he designed. James, his son, will then purchase 50 acres of land east of and primarily north of 56th and South Streets. That's where he will start Roberts Dairy, first with a cow and delivering it himself and gradually expanding. He sold a good portion of that land to the Faulkners, who established a riding academy. This is the same Faulkner family, by the way, who established a riding academy, which the barn of which and the house are still there, and that's the old Hayloft Theater property, which Richard Faulkner still lives in. So the Faulkner family jumps into the story at that point in time. In 1910, Another of his sons will build a house for himself at approximately 60th and A, which was on his quarter section, or just on the edge of it at least, which is today the site of Holy Trinity Episcopal Church. 1915, his son Charles will be a partner in what we will hear about in a minute, the Roberts Construction Company. So the family takes many different directions. 1916, James Roberts tells of standing or sitting at his house at what would be about, to think about this, about 4300 South Street, on the south side of South Street. The house is still there. He talks about being in his house in 1916 and watching his father's house, this one, burn to the ground in 1916. 1933, the family diary suggests that the land on the southeast corner of 56th and A was a buffalo wallow. I have to question that because I know of no place ever that we've noted there were buffalo in this area. But at any rate, if you go to that corner today, you can see it's empty and has a large depression in it, and in fact there's a retention pond in that area. So we'll call it a buffalo wallow if the Roberts want to, because at that point they will donate the land for Roberts Park, which originally had a curving driveway through there. You can still see the lines of trees which defined that. And of course, that's where we'll see the two stones from Lincoln Normal University. Probably the name most generally lives on now as Roberts Dairy, but of course that's long gone as well. Truly a mansion, I guess you'd have to say, is this house on Sheridan Boulevard. In the early part of the 20th century, George, middle initial P. Abel, will come to the city of Lincoln with his mother. He will attend the University of Nebraska, graduate in 1906 with a degree in civil engineering. Then in 1908, he will join with Charles Roberts, who we just talked about, and form a construction company. A quote says that they started with 6 heavy shovels, 2 steel wheelbarrows, and 1 hand concrete mixer. Pretty good start. 1915, the partnership will dissolve and all the property will be split by drawing lots between the two of them. At that point in time, Abel will build a house, this one at 2335 Sheridan. Ferdinand Fisk will be the architect of the building. It sits on about an acre of land. It is called a 6-bedroom, 6-bathroom house, 5,523 square feet. At that time, the Abel family, particularly through George, began acquiring other properties, not physical properties, but businesses, I should say. For example, the Buffalo Brick Company, which I think was in Kansas, and I most often associate them with the bricks which were used to make streets. The Buffalo Brick, you see quite frequently impressed with the word Buffalo. You'll also buy the Omaha, Lincoln, and Beatrice Railway, the Ready Mix Concrete Company, Union Terminal Warehouse, which when I was a kid became the Elgin Watch Company, and then became the largest building owned by the University of Nebraska, called University Hall, Nebraska Hall, and still there. I think maybe engineering is in that building, I'm not sure. Then he buys General Steel Products, Reimers Kaufman, the Universal Surety Company, which is insurance, and Inland Shock Baton, and Western Brick, and on and on and on, and lots of quarries and stuff like that as well. Now his business is called Nebco. Beside the property, the house itself, towards the north, were extensive gardens. I think that's Linda, one of the people standing there. Alice let us go and take some pictures before she sold the house. A stone grotto and a swimming pool, which to my knowledge never had any water in it. I don't know, but it obviously did early on. In 2006, the house sold for $625,000. 2015, exactly double that, $1,250,000. 2025, $2,017,000. So if you hold on to it for another 10 years and it doubles again, will be a heck of an investment. The area in the garden became known to kids primarily at Southeast as Hobbitville. I'm not exactly sure why, but it became one of those places that you were dared to go in, scale the walls, and do God knows what. My favorite story is told by Otis Young, who is a great storyteller, so we'll have to assume that the story is pretty correct. But when they went to add on to First Plymouth Congregational Church, Otis went to talk to George because they owned the company that manufactured the bricks, and they could still to manufacture the 6 different colors of bricks that were originally used in First Plymouth Congregational Church. And standing in the hallway or the entranceway, vestibule, whatever, inside the front door, Otis talking to George. George agrees that he will sell the brick to them at cost for the first major addition to First Plymouth, which is the building which runs towards the north off of the first building. And again, Otis's story has Mrs. Abel standing on the balcony upstairs saying to George, "George, you can do better than that." And ultimately, George gives the brick for the building. It's a great story, and I hope it's true. We'll assume it is. Next house, Henry Veith. Not so very far from here. In 1869, Henry Veith and his brother-in-law arrived in Lincoln, and they first established a bakery called the Union Bakery on the west side of Post Office Square, which would mean it would be on 9th Street between O and P Street. Lots of stuff in there. They also, about that time, Mr. Veith starts buying land here and there, and businesses as well. 1884, he will build a building which still carries his name at 816 P Street, the Veith building. And it's sometimes assumed that this was his grocery store. It was not. It was for his brother. The Veith grocery business with the Seton and Lee cast iron front. The business as a grocery store was not a success. 1892, Henry was 2 terms a city councilman, and at that point in time he lived in this house on the southwest corner of 9th and J. So if you look out the windows, you could easily see across the street to where this house was. 1924, Henry died in that house, 847 J Street, at the age of 78. In 2025, and again I'm looking at Ed for confirmation, I think the Veith is the 2nd oldest building in the Haymarket. And he's looking at the ceiling, so we're close anyway, if not exact. And behind it we have the Veith Court, which is an open air area. And of course, the Seton and Lee building is still there. This house long gone. A house which I had hoped to have a good story about. Unfortunately, I've never been able to really come up with a good history of this house. 746 Rose Street, which would put it on the northwest corner of 8th and Rose. So I took the picture, gave it to Gordon to duplicate for the program, and then decided to try and figure out a story behind the house, but not much of a story to tell, as near as I can tell. In 1890, it was an empty lot, so about that time the house was built. Apparently as a single residence house originally, but by 1911, so very quickly later, it became the Lancaster County Detention House. And I think this was primarily orphans, but it is unclear as well. By 1960, it has ceased to become Lancaster County Detention and is a vacant house. By 1966, it's owned by our old friend Otis Glebe, who was a property owner in Lincoln and Omaha and ran for Senate at one point in time. By 1975, the city directories show nothing there, but next door, probably the same address, 734, is Mrs. Lena Glebe, which I think was probably his mother, but could have possibly been his wife. The house is still there, again in private ownership, but no great story to tell about it. But if you drive down and see, you can see it's outsized for the neighborhood. and someone has been in there and torn down a great many houses. So they're just one of the few that still exists. One of the houses, which is a very large house, and an interesting story to tell, was at 1849 C, as in Charles Street, the southwest corner of 19th and C. Here you can see the house early on, pretty much in its full glory. To background the story, in 1879, a man started a business in Lincoln. His name was J.W. Winger, and he had just a store in Lincoln. And he wrote to an acquaintance in Pennsylvania, a man by the name of J.E. Miller, and suggested that he come to Lincoln, that this was a great city that was growing and was a great site for a store. In 1880, so the following year, Miller came and joined Mr. Winger in business in Lincoln. Winger, and it had various names. It soon became Winger and Miller. They had stores all over. At that time, they were located at 1010 P Street. And one of the things that they did besides selling was they were buying area lots and building buildings, commercial buildings in them. Then the plan appeared to me to be they would build a new building and they would make it a little bigger than the one they were in, and they would move in, or they would put it immediately up for sale, and if it sold, then they would stay where they were and they'd build another building. And they kept building and increasing in size. In 1885, Mr. Winger, who had originally invited Mr. Miller to come, he goes back to Pennsylvania. The firm becomes the J.E. Miller Company. And one of the things that J.E. Miller did at that point in time was he started with the Secrests, the Lincoln Street Railway Company. Around 1900, Mr. Miller will move from 1429 to 1849 C Street in an 8,000 square foot house, so considerably up. 1917, J.E. Miller will become the mayor of the city of Lincoln. And in 1940, the house is empty. The Millers have all moved out, and the firm, of course, has become the more famous Miller and Payne by that time. 1950, the house was purchased by a man whose name was familiar to me, but I couldn't figure out why until I asked Bob Campbell. The man's name is Claude Bromage, and he was a department manager at Miller and Payne. So in a way, the relationship stayed. 1975, it's a private home. Gary Grenson, 1995, David Retzlaff, a series of private people, one family owners, until the last time I looked. And last year, the house had been divided into 11 apartments, each apartment renting at that time for approximately $1,000 a month. So good income property. The house is not materially changed, but if you go down and look at it, you probably can still see this house in it. The Edward Sizer House. In 1874, Mr. Sizer moved to Lincoln. His first house was on the south side of P Street between 12th and 13th, where he, quote, built a little shack for a temporary home at $900. So that would be across the street to the north from what's now the Rampart Garage, pretty much, maybe just a little bit to the east of that, but across the street. Then in 1887, he will buy a lot at 1740 D, as in Dog Street. And he noted at that time it was the furthest out of any city home except for John Fitzgerald's Mount Emerald house. So it wasn't very far out at that, but it was not, well, we thought probably we would be growing directly east. This was to the south primarily. He also said it was handy because it was one block from the end of the mule-drawn streetcar. 1887, he built the 2.5-story Queen Anne house. I'm not sure I'd call it Queen Anne, but at any rate, he did. 1890, the real estate firm of Sizer and McClay will finish buying and converting the old Normal School, which we talked about earlier, 56th and South, and they will develop the village of Normal and plat it around the property. 1899, he leaves and becomes the chief clerk of customs at Havana, Cuba. That's a pretty good commute. So in 1901, he comes back to Lincoln and becomes the postmaster of the city of Lincoln. 1916, he sells the house and moves to the Windsor Hotel. He lived on for a time, his name did, as Sizer Street, which had first been known as Old Cinder Road, then Sizer Street. Today we know it as West Van Dorn, or West Calvert, excuse me. And a street called Sizer Street, which was south of A, from 14th to 17th. Interestingly enough, 1740D, this house is still extant. However, it has been altered. I think you can see this house in it, been remodeled several times, but it is still there. Governor John Thayer's house. John Milton Thayer was born in 1820 in Massachusetts. He got his law degree in 1841, and in 1854 he moved to Council Bluffs, Iowa. Obviously his stay there he was aware of what was happening, because that same year Nebraska becomes a territory. He goes across the river and settles in Omaha City. He became a Republican with the birth of the Republican Party at that point in time. 1860, he was elected to the lower house of the then two houses of the Nebraska legislature. 1861, the Civil War, he is a colonel in the 1st Nebraska Volunteer Cavalry. When he is done with the Civil War and brevets out, he becomes, interestingly, reported as a brigadier general, and also another has him as a major general. I'm guessing that it seems to have happened quite frequently. As you were discharged, if you were an officer, you somehow moved up in rank rather mysteriously at the same time. So brigadier or major general, I'm not sure, but when he came out of the Civil War, he did get that. 1866, he was a member of the U.S. Senate. Remember, this would have been in the territorial days. And it's said that he carried the papers to Washington, D.C., which made Nebraska a state. Just exactly what that means, I'm not sure. But in 1867, he did become one of Nebraska's very first U.S. senators. 1875, however, he became the territorial governor, not of Nebraska, but of Wyoming. And not too many, and of course it would be an appointment by the president. Not very many people have been the governor of two different states, or two different states and territories, but he managed to do it. Not for very long. 1886, he was elected governor of the state of Nebraska. So this would be an elected position, not appointed by the president. At first, he lived in the Windsor Hotel, which was on the southeast corner of 11th Q, where today we have the Q Place Garage. He hired an architect by the name of George W. Peters to design what is also called a Queen Anne home at 1905 Prospect. Again, I'm not sure I would call it Queen Anne, but again, he does. 1890, he is not a candidate to run for a third term as governor of Nebraska. However, James Boyd of Omaha has been elected governor of Nebraska and took the oath of office when somebody noticed that, interestingly enough, he was not a U.S. citizen, which throws things into sort of turmoil. And in fact, the Nebraska Supreme Court then reinstates Thayer as governor of Nebraska until the question can be answered. And ultimately, the U.S. Supreme Court will decide that Boyd indeed was a citizen of the United States, that he would have become a citizen as a child when Nebraska became a state. And the American Indian, they were all taken in as citizens, and he came in at the same time, which left him as governor of Nebraska for literally a few days, which was all were left of the term, but a very short period of time. 1892, Governor Thayer, for unexplained reasons, moves to Massachusetts. Again, too big a commute. And the following year, 1893, he moved back to Lincoln, and bingo, the house has moved. And it's no longer at the same address, but it is actually, it's now 1301 Rose Street. Excuse me, he lives at 1301 Rose Street, but he moves back to Prospect, which becomes 1901 Prospect. And if you look at the city directories, you have to be very careful, because numbers are very fluid, and the city directories are really, I would have to say, pretty inaccurate. And I've been duped more than once. It just straightened me out in the Hardy family, because I tend to look at the city directories and accept them as gospel, which they ain't. At any rate, the house is on the southeast corner of the intersection. 1906, he died. His funeral was at St. Paul Methodist Church, and was buried in the Grand Army of the Republic section of the Bayuca Cemetery. I think this is where James Young still lives. I'm not sure. No. An interesting house, and I've got several pictures of it, but unfortunately I couldn't find them all. This is one of the few that I did find. You'll notice it's shingle construction. We go back to 1921, when the Shrine in Lincoln decides not to buy the old Country Club of Lincoln property off of 8th and 7th Street. Instead, they decide to take the $80,000 that they have in war bonds and buy some property from H.H. Levitt. And they invested their entire $80,000 to build a country club and golf course. 1928, they hired Davis and Wilson to design the extant building. The original plans contained lots more than just the golf course. A picnic house, which is what this is, was a fishing lake, a shooting range, ball diamonds, a wading pool, croquet lawns, a bowling green, etc., etc. What they did do is, for $8,000, they built a 6-sided shingle construction picnic house. In the center part of it was a fireplace, interesting construction. To get there, you turned off of O Street on what I call Hillcrest Drive. I'm not sure it is named that, but if you go about 1 block towards the south, you can now turn towards the west and head for that retirement community in there. And if you step back to O Street, you can see that that street, which parallels O Street, still has a concrete bridge over a dry creek area in there, very clear. And this is where the house was, just to the south and west of there. 1980s, it was a private house. They've converted it and enclosed it. 2014, roughly, the house was gone and torn down, and of course it's all redeveloped with that retirement home and so forth in it. The only thing that's left is the extant bridge. And the guy that lived in it, because it was outside the city limits, I couldn't even look in the city directory. I think it was Mr. Brookstrom, who had a, not construction, but I think a plumbing business in the city of Lincoln. So not much of the house left. One of my favorite houses in Lincoln, though, was this one, if you want to call it a house, belonging to a man by the name of Frank Cornell, or Connell Zerung. In 1874, he graduates from the Lincoln High School and then the University of Nebraska. In 1888, he is noted as a druggist and capitalist. He also managed the Funk Opera House, which was on the southwest corner of 12th and O Streets. He then, in 1899, will be the manager of the Lansing Opera House, which will morph into what some of you may remember as the Varsity Theater. The Lansing, the Liberty, Oliver, and so forth, ultimately the Varsity. This house would be directly to the west of the Varsity Theater. Early 1900s, he bought 2 lots. Actually, there were 2 houses on the lot, tore them down, and built this property, which he lists as 1225 P Street. 3 stories, ivy-colored townhouse. At the time, I don't think you could say there were any other townhouses in the city of Lincoln. Behind it, and you'll see to the left, it says the Zerung Company. That's the stable, which was directly to the south behind the house. And while he was manager of the theater, which was directly to the left or to the east, they stored scenery in here. Later, it becomes a business which he owns called the Zerung Outdoor Advertising Company, and that's in the old building back there. He was elected to the city council. He also, interestingly, became the 22nd mayor of the city of Lincoln. Worked out okay, sat out. He also became the 25th mayor of the city of Lincoln. And, interestingly, also, he became the 28th mayor of the city of Lincoln. Not many people can say that. In fact, none, I would say. 1916, he was president of the Western League Baseball. Lincoln team at that time, the baseball team was called the Lincoln Tigers. 1942, he passed away. The house falls into private ownership until 1955. At that point in time, the house is purchased by the National Bank of Commerce. They tear the house down, and it becomes a drive-in banking facility. And if you look at that address today, it's where you exit the parking garage, and just within that area where the exit is, just to the west, that's where the house sat. You can still see where it was, but it's no longer a banking lobby. Just a house, or just an empty building. The last I knew, although it's probably easily something that could be purchased. Speedway Properties has their eye on it, I'm quite sure. If they a house which is one of the more interesting ones in that this is a recent picture. It is extant. It now has a big sign in front of it which notes, I think it's going to be a B&B again. The man that built it has to have one of the more interesting names. William the Conqueror Sisley, Sisley. He joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church in 1871 and then became responsible for designing the Battle Creek College in Michigan for them, then the Minnesota School in Minneapolis for them. And he also became the architect of the school in Walla Walla, Washington, again for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. He also, probably at that time, sketched plans for a new proposed college for the Seventh-day Adventists, which would serve the church west of the Mississippi River to the Rockies. So a large area will be a union of the churches in that area, and hence the name will be Union College. 1890, he is chosen as the architect for Union College. He receives a salary, and as an architect, I don't guess he was overpaid. He got $3.30 a day. He did not work 7 days a week, but when he ultimately gets his first increase, it goes to $25 a week. So as an architect, I don't think he was too well paid. He moved first to Lincoln and lived in a hotel downtown because there was nothing in the area. He then will be partially responsible for surveying and platting the village, which is going to exist, called College View, and the 22-acre campus, which plats at the same time. And also at about the same time, he will buy a lot at 3919 South 48th Street. So the west side of 48th Street, literally just north, but kind of within, if you will, the shopping district. First thing he did was build a barn behind this property on the alley behind it or to the west of it. That became his home. It also became the site of the first Seventh-day Adventist church services held within the area. And he also then rented out the property to workmen who were building Union College across the 48th Street to the west. Then, interestingly, faced with the problem of having to hire contractors in the city of Lincoln. I don't know whether he devised the idea or how it came about, but what he did was he advertised and went to people and said, for example, if you're a contractor and you want to bid for the basements, foundations for the buildings we're building, show me what you can do. Build me a foundation. And so they built the foundation. Then he went to rough carpenters, finish carpenters, roofers, everybody else, and asked them to demonstrate their abilities. Clever way, he got a house literally for free. This is the house, built as patterns. And of course, everybody did their best work, and the house stands very securely today. Meantime, the Burlington has built a spur from the railroad to the south. On April the 10th of 1890, groundbreaking for Union College occurs. In 1894, he's done here and has gone and moved on, becomes editor of two of the Seventh-day Adventist publications, the Adventist Review and the Sabbath Herald. he built across the United States and, in fact, worldwide, several college campuses for the Seventh-day Adventists. In 1901, he will retire to England, and there he died. This house is another one of them, which is not only extant, but looks very much like this today. So, something you can visit and see. A well-publicized picture of the city of Lincoln taken from the Capitol building, looking towards the southeast, and of course the Capitol stood exactly where it does today, so we're looking at the corner where we would see the Ferguson house on the corner, and where the little cottage to the left is would be a parking lot. And you can see nothing literally exists beyond there. And one of the photographs, which was mounted for a good long time in the ballroom, or excuse me, in the bedroom on the second floor of this house, around the walls in the northeast corner bedroom, they took the series of pictures which showed Lincoln taken as all the way around, taken by the Burlington, Missouri River Railroad from the Capitol building, of which this is one of them. And they're great pictures because they show Lincoln at that time did not have a single tree within its bounds. If you take the picture today, it looks like we live in a forest, but obviously all the trees are planted or are volunteers. Well, as the Capitol Commission, which consisted of Butler, Gillespie, and Kennard, chose the village of Lancaster to become the first state capital of the state, they were instructed, actually commanded by the legislature, to not buy lots on the auction sale in 1867, which would be used to finance the building of the first Capitol building and finance the state during its earlier years. They were instructed by the legislature as a commission not to bid. However, they were convinced by several people, including Mr. Sweet from Nebraska City, that if they did not bid, the auction might well fail. They needed to show their confidence in this rather harebrained scheme of moving the capital from Omaha as a territory to the city of Lincoln, or to Lancaster first, which would become Lincoln, which really didn't exist. How could anybody think this was going to work? The population probably, it's listed variously as from 13 to 30, so nothing was here. But at any rate, each one of them did buy lots and did build houses to show their confidence in this rather harebrained scheme. The little cottage belongs to a man by the name of Mr. Cooper, who came from Omaha and is well known as an ice cutter. The building in the middle, of course, extant as the Kennard House looks, hopefully, much as it did then. On the right is the Gillespie House. He was state kind of auditor treasurer at the time. Together they owned that entire block. They both chose an architect, John Keyes Winchell. Obviously, there were no architects living in the city at that point in time. The architects in Omaha and Nebraska City and so forth were pretty busy. Both those towns were growing. So they chose him, as did the governor, who will build his house elsewhere, to design their houses. The foundation stone for this, supposedly, was quarried from Antelope Quarry, in that part of the quarry where a good stone facing an outcropping existed along the Children's Zoo. If you would look from Capitol Parkway down into the Antelope Creek, you would see stone outcropping, supposedly. That stone was too soft and eschewed for building the first Capitol building. But if that was true, they made a mistake, because if it is all true and this stone was indeed quarried from Antelope Creek, it's still there. Whereas the stone they chose for the first Capitol was terribly bad and literally dissolved before their very eyes. At any rate, the stone is a dark color. It does not look to me quite like the stone along Antelope Creek, but the story is that's where it came from. You can't, unfortunately, drive by there and see that outcropping anymore, because along the bike path they have erected concrete block walls, and I think it pretty much covers all of that outcropping of stone. The lumber for the house came partially from Nebraska City, partially from Germantown, which comes Garland. There was a large forest there, and some of it came from Chicago. One of the problems with building a city where there are no forests or trees is everything has to be brought in. The shutters supposedly in the house were walnut, which came from Nebraska City, from an island there. And a lot of walnut did come up from Nebraska City. I don't know which came from what. Kennard, while this house was being built, he and his family actually lived in the Capitol building for a while. How that went, I don't know, but that is the story. Kennard later, after his wife will pass away, he will build a house directly to the east, which we think of later as being the Hagenau house, and now we think of it as a parking lot. He moved temporarily there. The house is acquired later by the Ferguson family, who live this side of it or to the west of it. It's variously a boarding house, a boys' home, a fraternity house, and for a while, Mrs. Ferguson, exactly why I'm not sure, but actually cooked and operated it as a boarding house. I'm sure she didn't need the money because the Fergusons were extremely well to do at that time, but nonetheless they did. 1967, the house was acquired by the Nebraska State Historical Society. It became the Statehood Memorial. Art Dershner, Lincoln architect, completely restored the house as we see it here, because in the interim period, the cupola on top, for example, had disappeared, the porch had disappeared, and so forth. The picket fence around the house today is, I am told, supposedly came from designs from the original picket fence, which was stored away someplace. Sometimes it's said in the Capitol building, I kind of doubt that. But at any rate, the picket fence around it was supposedly designed from pickets which had been salvaged, we see here. Okay, I talked about the northeast corner bedroom. The Nebraska State Historical Society, under the previous regime to the present one, which we will not talk further about, removed all the furnishings from the house and sold them. Closed the house, no longer open for tours. They still own it. Is it the oldest house in Lincoln? Well, yes, it probably is, depending on, if we mentioned the Seifert house being number 2, this would be number 1 if you disregard the cabin in Pioneer Park and the house out on West Calvert, which is not in Lincoln. It is on the National Register of Historic Places. I'm not sure what the State Historical Society, how they feel about it today, but it is probably sort of in danger. Eileen, were we running right up till 1? Was that the time? Is that the right? So I think this would be a good time to stop and see if there are any questions. If not, that means I've answered every single question that possibly could exist. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you back here again next month. That'll be the last time until they build a new parking garage. Any questions? Fine. If not, thank you very much.